December 2nd began like any other night. People were preparing for bed, finishing dinner, and browsing through their phones. Everything seemed normal. However, there was a quiet shift. Netflix introduced a new movie to its catalog without the typical fanfare of a big release. An upcoming 4-part documentary that would startle waves over the whole entertainment sector. Sherlock Holmes. The Reckoning was the title. Everything changed the instant somebody hit play. Viewers anticipated a celebrity gossip feast and a dramatic, possibly even sensationalized, rehash of past issues. Instead, they received something much more realistic and dark. They encountered a torrent of unsettling calls that made your skin crawl, unheard phone calls, unexpected video, and explicit footage that had been stored away for years. Interviews with individuals who had disappeared from the public eye were shown to them. Time had not eradicated the horror that was engraved on their faces. It was more than just a story. This was more than mere rumors. A man's deepest, most guarded secrets were being forced, kicking and screaming, into the bright daylight. The internet was on fire in a matter of minutes. Social media platforms exploded in a panic. Videos of unfiltered emotional reactions were all on TikTok. Individuals gazing at their screens in shock. Some crying, others in fury. It was like a worldwide courthouse on X, formerly Twitter, where millions of users gathered to analyze scenes frame by frame, instantly turning into digital detectives. Threads, which painstakingly laid down timestamps from the documentary that precisely matched outdated, forgotten news pieces, went viral. Videos and lengthy, unreported rumors were displayed side by side, giving them terrible legitimacy all of a sudden. The more viewers dug deeper into the documentary, the more horrifying the disclosures grew. Witnesses who had previously been too scared to even whisper their truths were suddenly having their testimonies verified on a worldwide platform. The whole scope of Cassie's pain was revealed. There were recordings of tense, terrifying arguments, claims of compulsion involving multiple women, and even passages that suggested Diddy might have been involved in the unsolved killings of Tupac Shakur and the infamous Big, two of hip-hop's biggest stars. It was anarchy. It was a collective shock. It was the real-time collapse of Diddy's meticulously built enterprise and his entire reputation for the entire globe to view. The Reckoning evolved from another popular documentary into a full-fledged cultural earthquake as the hours passed. Those who had previously fervently supported Diddy stopped talking. His longtime allies, who had supported him for years, started discreetly pulling away, erasing any ties from their social media accounts. In an attempt to understand the tidal wave, podcasts abandoned everything to record emergency episodes. Data, even big news organizations, which typically take a while to respond, begin primetime shows with a bleak headline. The Reckoning reveals years of covert abuse, violence, and systematic cover-ups. But what really took the world by surprise? The drama wasn't the only thing that set this celebrity scandal apart. It was the account's chilling consistency. You had a variety of victims who had never met, from various cities and years. However, they all shared the same narrative. Like a well-rehearsed script, they repeatedly described the same patterns of abuse, same paralyzing terror, and the same tactics of control. The gruesome image grew more apparent as more people watched. This was not a string of bad luck. This wasn't merely exaggerated drama for TV. This served as a model for mistreatment. The documentary skillfully combined footage of Diddy screaming, controlling, methodically, preparing, and using his victims' unvarnished, vulnerable interviews to make subtle threats. This, along with the unsettling, grainy video of his personal life, created a picture of a man who was much darker than anyone had ever thought, and the initial shock and fury turned into something very different. When the public saw all these disparate parts ultimately connected by investigative reporters, forensic analysts, and courageous former insiders, a loud cry for justice, because one terrifying idea started to circulate online after witnessing the Reckoning. Like wildfire, what would happen if everyone saw all of this? Will a federal judge take action? It turned out that the answer was arriving far more quickly and harshly than anyone had anticipated. The Reckoning's second episode wasted no time at all. Viewers weren't eased back in. It tore the curtain apart even more, revealing a depth of gloom that no one should ever behold. The tone changed from startling to very eerie. The documentary started piecing together years' worth of rumors with stark, questionable images that were impossible to ignore. Quiet fear was mastered in the first segment. Grainy, unseen footage of hotel hallways was zoomed in on. A woman can be seen shaking and hurrying by the camera in a panicked manner. She is followed a few seconds later by a dark figure. The clip is linked to a certain night by a timestamp on the screen. Cassie's night disclosed in a sealed legal document years ago in agonizing detail. All of a sudden, what had previously sounded like a he said, she said tale appeared to be a documented nightmare that had been caught on tape. The audio recordings followed. Reenactments were not what these were. They weren't performers reciting lines from a script. These were the real, unfiltered phone conversations. You could hear the voices' frenzied energy, the threats that were barely concealed behind soothing, controlled tones, and the startling backdrop crashes. You heard Diddy's voice telling everyone to take care of things right away. These clips have a startling amount of energy. People who watched from home reported feeling cold, as if they were listening in on conversations that were intended to remain inside the four walls. Professional and amateur solicitors started examining the tapes online, pointing out how some occurrences that had been recorded in previous police reports matched timings and even faint background noises. However, the documentary continued. It jumped right into the years-long rumors of adult-themed programming. It was still possible to see the unsettling power dynamics at work in Diddy's private life. Even though the clips were obviously blurred for television, survivors' interviews showed a pattern of manipulation, being placed in coerced situations, and having evenings when they felt like inmates in a golden cage, a world under his complete control. It was more than just the unadulterated passion that made their testimonies so compelling. It was the experiences of people who had never even met shared an unsettling resemblance. The same pattern of maltreatment, but in different lives and times. Then the time for reckoning came. Darkest turn to date. A shift that linked Diddy to the ghosts of the history of hip-hop. It started by looking into the unresolved killings of the infamous B and Tupac Shakur. Former members of gangs. Their words were twisted and their features were obscured by shadow. Spoke of discussions that extended well beyond a straightforward rivalry over music. Meetings and financial offers to resolve issues were alluded to by insiders. Old redacted police notes flashed across the screen, implying that industry meddling had suddenly erased some names powerful individuals, in particular from investigations. Diddy was not specifically blamed for firing the gun in the documentary. It was not need to. It merely made the connections that people have been discussing for decades. Online viewers began sharing side-by-side comparisons. A vintage 1990s interview. There was a message leaked there. An old publication reported a questionable payment. All of a sudden, everything fell into location. For the first time, the documentary depicted Diddy as a man who might have been at the center of a decades-long cycle of violence, rather than as a celebrity enmeshed in drama. Social media is unquestionably blew up. One person said, "This is bigger than Cassie," in a post that received thousands of likes. "This is bigger than music," someone else added. And fans weren't the only ones affected. After years of silence, former workers began to come out anonymously online, revealing information they had been afraid to share in public. Some discussed Diddy's aggressive and erratic mood swings. Others told of soulless nights when people were treated like props for his entertainment and then thrown away with equal ease. The internet turned into a crowdsourced real-time probe. 10 new theories were generated for each documentary clip. Every time stamp provoked new indignation. A flood of unwavering support greeted each witness who appeared on screen. Celebrity rumors were no longer the focus of the story. The music industry was not in disarray. It concerned an unmistakable pattern of coercion, abuse, manipulation, and perhaps even illegal orchestration, all concealed beneath a facade of unbelievable wealth and celebrity. And there was no turning back now that millions of people had seen it. Everyone was asking the same terrible question now that the news was out. What happens when a courtroom finally hears this much truth? Cassie Venter's legal team wasn't surprised by what they witnessed in the reckoning. Even if the rest of the world was in shock, it devastated them. Heartbroken that the world didn't see it until a Netflix documentary went viral. And comprehend the message they had been yelling into vacant rooms for years. While news organizations searched for sound bites and social media erupted, Cassie's lawyers were seated around a big conference table, meticulously reviewing every second of every episode. They weren't amused by it, frame by frame. They were comparing the documentary to the vast amount of evidence they had gathered in secret over the years. Information that, for whatever reason, had not gotten the full consideration it merited during Diddy's initial sentencing. That's when it occurred. The instant the pieces of the puzzle came together, the alignment. Cassie's scribbled assertions were exactly the same as the blurry hotel hallway film. They matched the dates and timestamps they had previously provided to the court with the terrifying audio recordings. The hazy adult-themed videos matched the explicit details Cassie had provided in her confidential, sealed testimony. The documentary was filling up the gaps in a puzzle that had been lacking its most crucial pieces, piece by piece. A lawyer moved forward, froze a frame on the screen, and muttered, "This is exactly what she described." Another took out a large binder, turned to the page titled Night of Incident, and held it up against the laptop. From the arrangement of the shadows on the wall, to the faint voices in the background, to the absolute dread audible in the audio, the likeness was horrifyingly true. Then they were struck by something much more startling. It was the other victims' testimonies. People who had never met Cassie, never worked with her, never even crossed paths with her. The patterns they described were the same. The same manipulation techniques, the same terrible threats, the same psychological trickery, and the same oppressive atmosphere of terror. All of these tales seemed to have been practiced. However, they weren't. They were authentic. They had been recorded years apart and were unprocessed. They have all been braided together into a single, eerie story of abuse by the reckoning. Just 2 days following the documentary's release, on December 4th, Cassie's legal team had assembled an enormous amount of evidence. Screenshots, audio waveforms, comprehensive chronology charts, and transcripts of the recent interviews were all included. Long after midnight, the lights in their office continued to shine. They wrote a formal letter to the judge who had heard Diddy's initial lawsuit, Arun Subramanian. The letter listed all of the connections between their sealed evidence and the public documentary. It was not a courteous tone. It had to be done immediately. It had a keen edge. It was also entirely unfiltered. It said, "Your Honor, now the whole truth has come to light. The reality that has now been revealed to the world is not reflected in the preceding sentence." All the while, the pressure from the media was intensifying the situation. When asked if even half of the clips in this documentary could be verified, legal experts began to appear on every news channel, all of them saying the same thing. The court was required by law to reconsider the sentence. The public uproar became much louder. For decades, talk programs discussed whether Diddy had been shielded by his notoriety. Encouraged by the documentary, additional former insiders came forward, stoking the flames by attesting to the same actions Cassie had put up with for years. Judge Subramanian silently considered the legal team's submission inside the SDNY courthouse. He didn't need to say anything, but he didn't respond or comment to the media. No statement could ever fully convey the impact of what he did next. He directed that all of the documentary materials be reviewed in their entirety right away. He asked additional memos from the initial case, and he arranged a high-level private meeting with federal prosecutors. That was the moment for Cassie's crew. At last they realized that the tide had changed irrevocably. And for Diddy, that was the formal start of the countdown to his demise. Because when a federal judge witnesses confirmed evidence that aligns so neatly and completely, the question is if the case is going to be reopened. How soon will he be summoned back to court to deal with the repercussions he believed he had avoided? The media covered more than simply the reckoning. They exploded it like a bomb on all of America's screens. Every major news network had changed into a public tribunal by the morning of December 6th. They were analyzing timelines, playing back clips, and posing the universal question: How is it possible for a man with Diddy's level of influence to conceal so many sinister secrets for so long? The documentary was no longer merely popular. It was taking over every cultural discussion. It was more akin to a national investigation that was taking place in real time while the entire globe watched, rather than just a Netflix release. Experts in digital forensics were brought in by CNN who would freeze footage, focus in on timestamps, and provide terrifyingly accurate explanations of how the data matched. How did the justice system miss this? Fox News asked frankly. Trauma counselors on MSNBC discussed the psychology of manipulation, fear, and power, and how it silences victims for decades. They were covering every aspect, every angle, emotional, legal, psychological, historical, pointed in a single, indisputable direction. Something much bigger than a mere celebrity controversy had been revealed by the reckoning. Public outcry was considerably more pronounced. Crowds started to assemble outside the SDNY courthouse in Manhattan. Reopen the case was written on the signs they held. People had printed out stills from the documentary, screenshots of private communications that had been released, and stirring lines from the survivors who had at last got the guts to tell their truth. Justice for Cassie, and no more silence. In order to connect sequences from the documentary to actual occurrences from the early 2000s, TikTok producers were piecing together complex timelines. Users reviewed previous police reports on Reddit threads, which grew into enormous collaborative investigative databases. Two forgotten business tales. One word continued to reverberate across all social media platforms as the voices became more united and louder. Responsibility. The impact was immediate and significant among the legal community. Once believing that the Diddy case was resolved, prosecutors now felt obliged to examine every piece of evidence with new, urgent eyes. Journalists began calling former detectives who had worked on the initial case, asking, "Did you ever see this footage? Were you aware of these allegations?" Even former investigators started speaking in online, remarking that key information displayed in the documentary was startlingly congruent with long disregarded claims from previous years. Internet rumors weren't the source of the pressure on New York's Southern District. It was based on proof. Evidence that was disregarded. Evidence that was concealed. And proof that was now being repeated on millions of TVs worldwide. This pressure also affected Judge Arun, not due to popular hashtags, but rather to Cassia's legal team had given him formal records that exactly matched what the audience saw in the program. Additionally, a federal judge is compelled to take attention when public indignation is consistent with reliable, verified information. Insiders described the atmosphere behind the courthouse's closed doors as weighty, tense, and unlike anything they had witnessed in years. Later, an unidentified senior court clerk disclosed that the judge spent hours in his chambers going over portions of the documentary. He was observed marking remarks in the new court documents, playing back audio recordings again, and pausing at specific points while comparing them to the sealed case files. The terrible reality became more apparent the more he reviewed. Not only was the initial 50-month sentence lenient, it was based on a wholly unfinished and possibly purposefully obfuscated understanding of the defendant. Rumors that a significant decision was about to be made started circulating through the courthouse corridors by December 7th. In anticipation of a leak, reporters set up camp outside the judge's chambers. News for the first time in the history of celebrity law. Anchors conjectured in real time that a documentary would soon have a direct influence on a federal punishment. After the initial rumors spread, social media went crazy. The judge is thinking about reopening the case. The entire world waited. For the first time in his adult life, Diddy was losing control of the story as the pressure increased. At last, the truth had broken free from its prison, and it was directly aiming at him. By December 7th's evening, it was evident that the ground Diddy was walking on was moving more quickly than he could react. The courthouse no longer seemed like a place where regular legal business was conducted. It had the feel of a volcano about to erupt. Outside, journalists set up camp throughout the bitterly cold December evening. Former co-workers who had previously vehemently supported Diddy have abruptly stopped talking. The astonishing speed at which everything was developing appeared to have shocked even his own legal team. a bunch of solicitors often renowned for their self-assurance and loud confrontational techniques. The message was then distributed internally early on December 8th. It was a single, straightforward email that made all the difference. An emergency hearing has been formally scheduled by Judge Arun Subramanian for Wednesday, December 10th at 9 o'clock a.m. One sentence. No justification, no wait, and no opportunity for discussion. There is only one possible explanation for a federal court acting so swiftly and setting up an emergency hearing at such short notice. After the reckoning, he was shown evidence that was not only convincing but explosive. The entire courtroom district felt like a breaking news zone by the time the Sun